Good evening, everyone. When Dom asked me to speak at this event, he invited me to speak about data. And I didn't think that was the most exciting topic. And you're probably thinking Excel spreadsheets and statistics and numbers. And yes, that is all true, but data is more than that. It sits at the heart of every discovery that we make as researchers. And over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm hoping to maybe change the way that you think about data. But before I do that, I want to tell you how I came to work on motor neuron disease. So I always knew that I wanted to help people, and the skills and the area that I excelled at was mathematics and statistics. And so I went to university and I studied maths and stats in the hopes that one day I could apply this in a way that would help people. And I sort of got my first taste of this during my PhD, where I was analysing data to look for, I was working on diseases that had sex biases. And so I would use maths and stats to look for patterns in DNA data that might explain, for example, why more males developed autism. And when I finished my PhD, I was looking for work and I came across a job with Associate Professor Kelly Williams working on the genetics of motor neuron disease. And I thought, I knew there's a sex bias. There are more males affected than females. I can use what I know and what I've learned, I can help. And 8 years later, I'm still here. I'm working harder than ever because it's much more complicated than what I had originally anticipated. And now I use maths and stats in many different ways, over many different projects to try and identify the causes of motor neuron disease. And I ummed and ahed about which project I wanted to tell you about today. Did I want to tell you about the project that uses DNA data to try and link people who we didn't know were related to create a new family for gene discovery? Or do I want to tell you about a project that uses a really, really unique and rare data set of DNA from brain tissue for people with sporadic motor neuron disease, where we're looking for gene defects in this brain DNA that we can't find in blood DNA. But I opted against those. The project that I wanted to talk to you about is one that's really led to more questions than answers, and Dom has already touched on this one tonight. And it's work done with Dr. Amanda Wright. So she was a neuroscientist in our research centre, and she's now in her final year of studying medicine in rural New South Wales and Orange. And during Amanda's placements, she noticed a lot of people with motor neuron disease. And when she spoke to different healthcare professionals, they were all saying the same thing, that in Western New South Wales, there are a lot of people living with motor neuron disease. And unfortunately, there were no data sets to really confirm what people were suspecting. So Amanda took it upon herself to create a data set. So she spent months trawling through hospital medical records, palliative care, community care records to generate this data. And Amanda and I analysed this together, and we found some really unusual results. So as Dom has already touched on, bulbar onset motor neuron disease, so this is when the symptoms first appear, sort of in the muscles from your neck up, that's usually found in up to 1/3 of people with motor neuron disease. But we saw this in around 60% of our females, and that's really unusual. And instead of the sex bias that I was expecting to see, I was expecting to see more males. That actually wasn't what we saw. The rates of motor neuron disease were higher amongst females, like very high, and they ranked amongst some of the highest rates in the world. And if we looked on a map where people were living with motor neuron disease, there were some towns that had more than 10 times the expected number of people living with motor neuron disease. And we thought, why is this? Well, could this be genetic? Yes, but unfortunately, people in rural New South Wales, they don't always undergo genetic diagnostic testing, so we don't have that information. Maybe it's environmental or occupational, and that could be true, but again, this information is not captured, so we can't answer these questions. So where do we go from here? Well, the fact that motor neuron disease has just become a notifiable disease is about to change how we do all of these analyses. But in the meantime, Amanda is going to continue to collect information on people diagnosed with motor neuron disease so that in the coming years we can continue to examine these patterns. And with Associate Professor Kelly Williams, we're going to look at the genes to see if there's any genetic causes that might explain what we're seeing. And at the same time, we're going to collect biological samples from these individuals. So you can think of blood and hair and urine, and we're going to incorporate this into our biobank at Macquarie University. So at Macquarie, we have Australia's largest motor neuron disease biobank, and these individuals will be included in that, along with questionnaires and clinical data. And this is really going to lay the groundwork for us to be able to do environmental studies. So, thank you. From what I've just said, you'll notice that it's not one kind of data that's going to answer these questions. It's many types of data that we're going to need to answer all of these questions. And I said at the start of my talk that data sits at the heart of all of our discoveries. And it doesn't just appear by itself. Data comes from people. So when you think of your Excel spreadsheets and you see those numbers, I don't want you to just think of numbers. I want you to think of people. It comes from people who are severely ill, who take the time out of their day to donate these biological samples to do a 3-hour questionnaire. It comes from our clinicians who so carefully record this information. It comes from the researchers standing at the back of this room who spend years conducting experiments to just generate a little bit of data to try and answer just a little part of a big question. That does deserve a clap. And I just wanted to finish with a quote from the late Neil Danaher, who said, in a week's time, give me a minute. In a week's time, you won't remember a thing that I've said, but I hope you remember what I do. And I think that really captures what research is all about. It's not about these papers. It's not about the statistics that I'm telling you about. It's about what that allows us to do. That allows us to better understand motor neuron disease, to improve the care of people living with motor neuron disease, to start to develop treatments and find answers for families. It's all of that. And as a data analyst who relies so heavily on the generosity of all of these different people to generate the data that I use, it is my absolute privilege and a humbling responsibility to use my skills so that I can help against the fight against motor neuron disease. Thank you very much.